A few years ago, I had an opportunity to attend a workforce training conference in San Francisco. And I was super excited about getting to go. First, because I'd never been to this beautiful city. And second, because I was going to have a chance to be in networking and relationship with my peers from across the country. So as I was walking around down by Fisherman's Wharf, I was approached by what I assumed to be a homeless woman who asked me for cash. Now, I didn't have very much on me at the time, so I pulled out a little bit of what I had and handed it to her. She took it, looked at me, and said, "Is that all?" Then she turned and walked away. That interaction has stuck with me to this day. Something just felt off about it. And in case you're wondering, yes, she did keep the cash. You see, the problem was I didn't offer her what she wanted, nor did I understand or ultimately offer her what she needed. And again, it just felt off to me. So it wasn't until a few years after that event that I started reading books like Toxic Charity by Robert Lupton and When Helping Hurts by Corbett and Fickert. And I began to rethink my own role in helping others. And these points were echoed for me as I prepared to leave for my first mission trip. There was a group of us from our church that were going to Appalachia. And my mentor at the church took me aside and reminded me that the mission trip was more than just about getting tasks done. It was about being in relationship with the people that we would be serving. So as my team prepared to build a shed on a widow's property, they got together and they were discussing the design of the roof and what it should look like. But I stepped off to the side for a moment and sat down with her on her porch. And she told me about her deceased husband and his military service, and we played with her dogs, and we just had really good conversation. You see, the shed was something that she wanted. The conversation and the time spent was something that she needed. So my talk today is going to be looking at the difference and talking a little bit about the disparity between wants and needs, and how, until we form a relationship with somebody, that we won't necessarily know what those needs are. In our opportunity to look at this, that sometimes by not knowing that, when our attempt to help actually doesn't do any good at all. And yeah, I said it, sometimes when we try to do good, it actually doesn't do any good. And why is this important? Well, there was a study from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that reflected approximately 1 billion volunteers worldwide. And on average in the United States, we spend about 52 hours per year volunteering our time. In fact, as I look around the room today, I am willing to bet that there are many of you who have recently given of your time, talent, or treasures to help someone else out. And what I'd like for us to do for a moment is to rest in that. Think about a time recently when you volunteered either on your own or as part of a group to help someone else out. And if you would, just close your eyes and picture yourself in that moment. Picture what you were doing. And as you think about what you're doing, turn your attention now to the person or the people that you were helping. What do you see on their faces? Do you see gratitude, shame, joy, appreciation? And now turn your thoughts inward for a moment, if you would, and focus on the emotions that you're feeling in those moments. Are you feeling blessed, outraged, happy, or at peace? Hold on to those for a few moments, and please open your eyes again. In those scenarios that we've been thinking through, there's no right or wrong answers or emotions to be felt. Both you as well as the person receiving the assistance had something to gain from that transaction. And let's ramp this up a little bit. Let's consider you as individuals within a community-minded organization. Now, when I talk about community-minded organization, these are companies or organizations that have espoused values or mission statements around doing good in the community. They organize community service days where they give the employees a day off and they can go out and work in the community, or they form project teams and partner with local nonprofits. And by their sheer numbers, they have great opportunity to do good or not so. A 2019 story out of Tacoma, Washington reported that the Northwest Goodwill indicated that year it was going to cost them $1.2 million to dispose of donations that they received but they could not use. Things like air conditioners and propane tanks and mattresses are examples of donations that they received that they are unable to repurpose or resell. And what's the net impact? That's $1.2 million less for them to invest in programming or education in their community. So before we go to help, let's step back for a moment and assess the help that is needed. The level of outreach that is needed when somebody has been involved in a tornado or a hurricane is very different than what is needed by someone who has been in generational poverty. Picture, if you would, the person that you pass on the street corner each day who's asking for money. Handing them cash is a crisis-level response. It satisfies a want for today, but most likely tomorrow they'll be back. Because we are, without being in relationship with that person, we're never able to identify the need, whether it be secure housing, stable income, or mental health assistance. When we examine and think about what is a way to be helpful, I pulled on the work by Lupton and came up with this idea of a community outreach continuum. So as the community-minded organization is determining what's the best way to help in their community, they need to look at what is wanted or what's going on there. Let's frame this in an example of a family who maybe has no insurance and recently experienced a fire. At the crisis level is the day that the fire happened and maybe a couple of days after. So the types of help they need are very different than several weeks later when we move into transition. So the transition may be when that family is ready to start rebuilding. The family could even potentially come alongside and be partners in that rebuild. And then finally, we look at the bigger picture of community development. So as the community-minded organization taps in to help, what can we do to the bigger picture? Could they work together in that community to establish, let's say, a benevolence fund in case of future emergencies? Or potentially, could they work with the city to determine if there was adequate number of fire hydrants in that area? So as we think through of a community-minded organization that wants to help, I began to think too of how do they choose which people from their organization to help? Could they be intentional in their leadership development as part of this outreach? So I drafted this idea of a leadership development continuum. The idea that brand new people within an organization can come in on these projects as team members. As they develop their experience over time, they would then become team leaders. And then ultimately, they would bring projects to the organization and look at leading those that they have brought forward. So given these two continuums, wouldn't it be awesome if a community-minded organization had some kind of grid where they could just say, how do we plug in to our community with our appropriate leaders? Well, I'd like to propose just that. This grid gives us an idea of where we could slot folks in. It intersects the community outreach continuum along with the leadership development continuum. And I want to use an example of a community-minded organization who would be interested in partnering, let's say, with a shelter that assists people experiencing homelessness. A crisis responder might be someone from that community-minded organization who gathers up clothing from a clothing drive that they held and takes it down to the shelter. And while they're there, they take a tour so they can learn more about the inner workings of the shelter and working with that population. The crisis response leader is probably the person who organized the drive. They communicated with the shelter ahead of time to determine what the needs are and then share that information within the organization. The community champion is someone who is familiar with what the shelter does, and they are going to be a team member as we ramp up our efforts in outreach with that shelter. And then finally, the community builder. This is a well-developed leader who's also very familiar with the workings of the shelter. So they may serve as a liaison between the two organizations or possibly even become a board member of that organization. So I'd like to circle back to my trip to San Francisco. What if the organization that planned that conference had deployed such an effort? How would that maybe have looked different? Well, as a new member of that organization, I would be a crisis responder. So they could have communicated with me what kind of things that Bay Area shelters need, and I could have brought or purchased those on my trip. The boots on the ground leaders would have been the ones that communicated with those Bay Area shelters to do the needs determination and then share that information with those that would be attending. And finally, at our community builder level, the leadership of the organization that held this conference, I envision them planning a roundtable where they invite in leadership from the various Bay Area shelters, and they could talk about the intersectionality between workforce development and poverty alleviation. So I would challenge our community-minded leaders as we begin to think about projects. Look at it from the lens of what is the best way to intersect with our community. At the same time, what is the best way to develop our leaders? And in doing so, we would have an opportunity to do more good than harm in that community. Thank you.